Gang. Welcome to the weekly Met Forum video chat for Sunday, November 22nd, 2015. I almost said 1992 there for some reason. I don't know why. Just backed us up a little more than a decade there. Sorry about that. All right. Before we do that time warp thing again there, let's go ahead and get started. Assuming I can stop laughing over that piece of idiocy. First of all, I want to welcome everybody. As usual, we'll have a forum roundup tonight, a little bit of information for you, and a tip or two to come in handy. Didn't do a lot in the way of Apple news this week. I've been feeling a little bit under the weather, so didn't spend a lot of time researching the Apple news this week. Dive right into what will likely be a kind of short show. First of all, we have currently now over 283,000 members. The newest of which looks like Rosaline S.I. That was a few minutes before the show. My apologies if I mispronounced that. Hopefully you are finding your time in the forum helpful. I want to remind everybody, if you're just visiting and lurking around unregistered, you can use the forum to answer questions, to look up answers. That's kind of as a research thing. But in order to ask a question, you need to go ahead and become a member and post your question. There is a contact us area, which some people use to try to post a question, but that area is essentially for forum-related questions dealing with the operation of the forum. So go ahead. Membership is free unless you choose to become a premium member and help defray the cost of running the site. Membership is free. It doesn't cost you anything to ask a question. Go ahead and register and join us. Enjoy the fun. You'll find a lot of helpful folks there. All right. Along the lines of helpful information that you will see in the forum, we're looking once again at file vault related issues for people who are having some issues with file vault. Keep in mind that there's a post there, post number 14. I'm going to post a link to this in the show notes this evening, but it deals with some issues relative to recovering file vault credentials. One of the problems with file vault is the thing that makes it most secure is also a potential weakness, in the sense that if you forget your password, you've got to have some means of backing out, okay, and recovery. And this thread deals with some of the file vault related issues. Won't go into it tremendous amount of detail. I think it's a little easier to read this thread than to try to follow it over audio. It can get a little confusing with the way File Vault handles things. Also, another little tidbit of information that came up in a forum thread this week had to do with the difference between moving a file versus copying a file. There is a procedure in the Finder in OS 10. It's been around for quite a while that allows you to move a file as opposed to copying it. Many times people will, you have a file in one location on your hard drive, you want to move it to a different location on the hard drive. People will copy the file from point A to point B and then delete the original from its original location. That is the way that I generally do things because I have a hard time remembering the move option. Now, Chaz G, one of our admins, pointed out that moving a file rather is not quite as safe as copying it. When you move a file, it gets deleted from its original location and placed in the new spot. If you make any mistake while moving the file, accidentally letting go of the file means it can be put somewhere you don't want it. Any kind of problem goes wrong in that movement operation, i.e. you have a power failure when you're moving the file. Anything like that goes wrong, it can result in the file becoming damaged, leading to loss of data. It's generally a lot safer to just copy the file from point A to point B and then go back and delete the original. Yes, it can take a little more time, especially if you're dealing with a large file, but it's certainly a bit safer. That whole thread, if you if you want to look at it, that whole thread will give you some good information. The trick to moving, by the way, is to hold down the Option key. You've selected a file. You're going to hold down the Option key and go to the Edit menu and select Move. But once again, as our moderator pointed out, the problem there is if anything goes wrong, it can lead to some issues with the loss of files. So I'll put that there in the show notes. That'll give you something to decide how you want to deal with things. Personally, for me, I always forget to hold down the Option key and choose Move, and I end up going back later and deleting the original files, but that certainly cuts back on the potential for data loss. All right, another little tidbit of information here comes from Apple support, actually. An Apple support note. If you are experiencing network connection drops or just general drops when you're trying to use AirPlay to stream content from one of your devices to an Apple TV, check your network settings. Oftentimes these drops are the result of using 802.G as your network base. Sometimes things will slow down if you've got a lot of network traffic, and that will cause some drops. I found that technical note last night as I was trying to figure out why AirPlay was not being as reliable for me on the new iMac as I thought it would have been. Something is causing my AirPlay connection between it and the Apple TV to drop out periodically. I'm still troubleshooting that, but the troubleshooting tips that were in this tech note that I'll post a link to are really handy. And the biggest of them is when you're trying to stream between the Apple TV and another AirPlay enabled device, it can be tremendously helpful to have those devices on an 802.N network. When I checked last night, I noticed that I had my iMac on a segment of my network that I've reserved for slower devices, for printers and things like that that don't really need the speed. Essentially, got two networks set up, one to deal with the slower, older, slower stuff, and one to deal with more modern equipment. So you want to check those out. And also, Johnny Evans over at Computer World site has an article that deals with that and has a few more tips for improving AirPlay performance. Those tips are similar to the ones that Apple put out, but they I think there are a couple of extras there. Johnny goes through and he does a little bit of um, an overview of AirPlay, what it is, what it does, and some of the things that he mentions are, although they are basic network things, we don't always think to do them. One of them is make sure that you have things such as cordless phones, microwaves, etc., baby monitors aren't near where your router is, because they can sometimes interfere with wireless networks, particularly if you're using the 2.4 gigahertz band. You will see a lot of cordless phones, for example, that interfere with that. Restarting will sometimes cure some AirPlay problems, particularly one where the AirPlay icon is grayed out. That's a bug that some people are experiencing from time to time. Some 2013 MacBook and Mac Pro owners are having difficulty using AirPlay over an 802B or G network. Apple, that's what I mentioned in the other tech note, where Apple has advised that making sure you're on an N network if possible. And they've also advised apparently that turning off Bluetooth if you're having those kinds of connectivity issues might be one thing to check. AirPlay also, one of the things you'll want to be careful of, if you are low on disk space on your computer, and that's one of your AirPlay devices and you're streaming content from there, you may experience some patchy play. So all of those things are there. Johnny has a couple of other tips. I have a link to that. It has a number of things. Some of them are in the same. Some of them are the same as the Apple guidelines. Some of them are a little different. Very good explanation there, even if you're not following, even if you're not one of these people that's a network guru. Also over there, Johnny's got another article up at the Computer World site about, and this app may be of interest, this article rather may be of interest to someone who is looking for or examining the possibility of buying an iPad Pro, and you're trying to make a decision. He has a list of 7 apps, and I suppose these are types of apps in a way. He mentioned 7 apps, but these types of apps that occurred to me as I read the article, he feels that these show off some of the productivity potential of the iPad Pro. Things that can be done better on the Pro than on previous versions of iTunes. A couple of them, AutoCAD, if I remember correctly, was one of them. Another one is a program that I believe is called Huddle, which is generally geared toward coaches. If you're doing any kind of sports coaching, you may find that app useful. And he seems to feel that it really kind of shines. It's the kind of app that shines on the iPad, on that iPad Pro. One of the ones that just anybody would be interested in. The other apps that he mentions are kind of specialized in similar ways, but one of the ones that that I think is open to anybody that he feels really shines on the iPad Pro is iMovie. For a variety of reasons, the 4K editing, having the horsepower to do some decent editing. If that holds true for a lot of people, it gives you a lot of field editing power without having to carry around a laptop and a bunch of other gear. So that's something to keep in mind, and certainly worth looking at if you are going to be in the market for an iPad Pro anytime soon. Also, on a different note, we have one of our members posted earlier today a question about moving the photos library to an external drive. As you know, Photos is the program that Apple has targeted to replace iPhoto. And it's popped up with Yosemite. It's now in El Capitan. iPhoto still works, but you have to be running the absolute latest version of that. And eventually iPhoto will go bye-bye. But if you are running photos and you've got a large photo library, that file can be taking up a significant amount of your drive space, particularly if you're on one of the newer Macs that have flash drives as opposed to spinning hard drives. Typically, people will, because of cost, go with perhaps a smaller SSD or flash drive than they would have if they had bought a spinning platter drive. So if you're trying to save yourself some space and you want to move that photo library over to an external hard drive, that can be done relatively easily. One of our members, sorry, I do not remember who, tried to do it using symbolic links. And conceptually, for those of you that are not familiar with them, symlinks or symbolic links behave somewhat like aliases. And there are a lot of situations where they're helpful, but that did not work for the photo library. So here's a suggestion on how to move the photo library. And this comes from the website iMore. Okay. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you have quit Photos. In other words, get out of the OS X version of Photos, quit that completely. Go in and find your existing Photos library. It's going to be in your user folder inside the Pictures folder. So if your username is Bob McDonald, look for the folder Bob McDonald, and then look inside there in the Pictures folder. From there, you will see an icon that says Photos, and it has the Photos logo on it. That's the library file. What you're going to do is take that library file, copy it over to another drive, to an external drive, for example, or some other storage. Okay? Now, once that copy is complete, and it may take a while depending on the speed of your machine and how large your library is. Once that copy is complete, okay, what you're going to do is, this time when you go to launch Photos, Option and then click. In other words, Option and launch. Hold the Option key while launching Photos. That will force Photos to ask you where the library is. Okay? What you do is you go and you point it, you select it and follow the directions and point it to the new library. The one thing that you have to keep in mind when you do this is make sure that when you need to work in Photos, that your whatever drive you have your photo library on is connected, particularly if you're going to be doing some iCloud syncing. So you're going to want to make sure that that drive is connected. I have not tested what Photos does when it can't find it. I know that other Apple applications, such as iTunes, behave similarly, and in terms of moving the library. And if they can't find the library on the external drive, they default back to the original location. So if you're not careful, it's possible sometimes to have some of your content in one place, some of your content in another. But that can be resolved, like I said, by making sure that you have your library attached, the drive that has your library attached when you launch the program. That's a good tip to keep in mind. It works also with iMovie, with iTunes, iTunes, for me, I choose to let iTunes organize my files so that if I ever have to move the library, everything's in one place. But essentially, iTunes behaves the same way. When you move the library to an external drive or to a network drive or anything of that nature, you have to make sure that that drive is available. The drive that has that library is available because otherwise iTunes will default to its location in your home folder. And sometimes there'll be things that I've had that happen to me before, where it defaulted without me realizing it. And when I went to play something in my library, everything looked normal until I get all these exclamation points because my main library wasn't online. I had purchased some stuff, and it took me a minute to find it and realize that it was buried inside my my original user folder because iTunes didn't know where to find the new library file. So that's something that you want to watch out for. It's not a huge deal, but it can certainly give you a bit of a scare the first time you encounter a problem. And let me say, it goes without saying, okay? These programs that, like iMovie or like iTunes, rather, I must have iMovie on the brain tonight, but these programs like iMovie, like iTunes, iPhoto, Photo, and the like, that store your content in a library file. Any of these kinds of apps. It goes without saying that if you're gonna muck around with that library file, moving it, anything of that nature, make sure you've got a backup of that file because rebuilding a library, if it's of any significant size whatsoever, can take quite a bit of time, assuming you have the data. I've had my iTunes library get wrecked a couple of times, and I've had to rebuild the content, and that can take a significant amount of time if you also have to reload the content. I mean, imagine having to reload all those photos, even assuming that you could. So that's something to keep in mind. And I know this is a little bit shorter than usual, folks, but that's about all we had for the tips and tricks this week. As I say, I've been a little bit under the weather this week, so I haven't done as much searching for tips as I normally do. We'll call it a short Thanksgiving show. I want to wish all of our U.S. listeners a happy Thanksgiving. I know some of my Canadian friends got a jump on Thanksgiving about a month ago. You guys are a little early, by the way. The real Thanksgiving is this week, not a month ago, Brian. Okay. But anyway, I do hope that you guys will enjoy Thanksgiving. Those of you that are celebrating. Next week, we'll probably have a bit more in the way of tips and tricks. I'm going to spend some time this week running some other performance tests and the like. Got some things in mind that I want to try. I'll keep you updated on that. And coming up sometime in the next couple of weeks, I know holiday shopping season is here, and some of you are going to be getting new gear. And you might be inclined to pass your older gear on to charitable organizations, family members, etc., etc., etc. So probably not next Sunday, but here shortly, as in like within the next couple of weeks, I plan to spend probably most of the Sunday chat talking about some things that you need to keep in mind when you are passing on older gear. And when it's a good idea, when it's not a good idea, some things that you need to remember to do before you deactivate your older gear, and things that you need to be aware of in deciding who's going to be the beneficiary of your being in the giving spirit. Because let me just give you an example. A while back, well, several years ago now, I ran into a post where somebody suggested giving older Macs to schools to try to increase the number of Macs that were in schools. And this was before as switching from Windows to Mac was just starting to take off. That sounds like a good idea, but I can tell you this from my own personal experiences. There are a lot of schools where the technical people that are associated with providing technical information to the schools and providing support, computer support, are not familiar with Macs, not familiar with where to go for software, not familiar with troubleshooting Macs. And so while the teacher or student that you want to give that Mac to use at school might really enjoy it and appreciate it, they may not have the level of tech support that you would think. Just because somebody is working in tech support, it does not necessarily mean that they are fluent or even well-versed in Mac performance and how to keep them up and running. And one of the other things you have to keep in mind is that older Macs do not necessarily give a good picture now of what the Mac is currently capable of. You know, that G5 that you've got sitting in the closet, or that first generation Mac Pro, something like that, while it may be good for what they're going to do with it, it has some limitations in terms of software it can run. And if you're thinking about giving it to them as a means of showing what the Mac can do, that may not be the best way to go. So we'll have some more thoughts on that as look for that probably in about 2 weeks. I want to get it in before the holiday season is over. That way, as you are acquiring new gear, hopefully you'll have some ideas about places that might be useful. And I'm going to be asking the forum members to chime in if they know charitable organizations that are good about getting these kinds of gear. We'll talk about some things that you can do to protect any older data that you might have removed, what is a reasonable method, and things like that. So look for that in about 2 weeks. And it looks like that's going to just about do it tonight, folks. I know this is a little bit shorter than usual. I promised not to go on a rant today. So, hey, we're good. I didn't do that. I'm going to go and do a couple of things that I've been planning to do, including search for my Windows 8 disk so I can activate Windows 10. And I hope that you guys enjoy the Thanksgiving Day. Don't eat too much of the turkey, and I'll see you back here next week for the Sunday Mac Forum video chat.